Judge Harold Myers ran his courtroom like a tight ship. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor, he prided himself on fairness, but his brand of justice was cold and unyielding. His rulings rarely left room for negotiation or mercy, and his sharp tongue often left defendants flustered. "The law is the law," he often declared, a mantra he wielded with precision. That Monday morning, the docket was filled with the usual minor infractions: speeding tickets, expired registrations, parking violations. Harold breezed through the cases with practiced efficiency, barely glancing at the defendants before issuing fines or dismissals. It was just another day in the courthouse. Next case, the bailiff called. Case 421, Evelyn Carter. Harold looked up as a woman stepped forward. She was in her early 40s, dressed in a simple gray blazer over a maroon blouse, her posture upright but not stiff. She didn't shuffle nervously like most defendants. Instead, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that immediately caught Harold's attention. She didn't seem intimidated by the courtroom or the gavel in his hand. The bailiff read the charge: an unpaid parking ticket for leaving her car in a faculty-only zone near the university campus. The fine was minimal, but Evelyn had chosen to contest it, which was why she now stood before Harold. "Ms. Carter," Harold began, his tone curt, "the record shows your vehicle was parked in a restricted zone for over 2 hours. Do you dispute this?" Evelyn nodded politely. "Yes, Your Honor. I don't deny that my car was parked there, but I believe there were mitigating circumstances." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Mitigating circumstances?" He leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening." Evelyn explained, her voice steady and measured. "I was running late to an emergency meeting with a state education board representative. It was a high-stakes discussion about securing funding for student scholarships. The regular parking lot was full, and I had no choice but to park temporarily in the faculty zone. I intended to move my car immediately after the meeting, but it ran over time." Harold studied her for a moment. Her explanation was clear and reasonable, but it didn't change the fact that she had broken the rules. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone firm, "while I understand your situation, the law doesn't allow for exceptions based on convenience. Faculty zones are restricted for a reason. If everyone parked there when they were in a hurry, it would create chaos." Evelyn nodded again, her expression neutral. "I understand, Your Honor. I'm not asking for special treatment, only for the court to consider the context." The courtroom was silent, save for the faint rustling of papers. Harold tapped his pen on the bench, his mind made up. "The law is clear, Ms. Carter. The fine stands." "Thank you, Your Honor," Evelyn said, her tone neither resentful nor submissive. She offered a small, polite smile, then turned and walked out of the courtroom, her head held high. Harold watched her go, a faint crease forming between his brows. Something about her composure unsettled him. Most defendants left his courtroom frustrated, muttering under their breath or slamming the door on their way out. But Evelyn Carter had left without a trace of bitterness, as if the fine had been a mere inconvenience in a day filled with far more important matters. For reasons he couldn't quite pinpoint, Harold found himself wondering about her long after she had disappeared from view. The courtroom buzzed with the shuffle of papers and the low hum of whispered conversations, but Evelyn Carter's footsteps were calm and measured as she exited. Outside, the courthouse steps were bustling with people, yet she seemed unbothered by the morning chaos. She glanced at her watch, a slim silver piece on her wrist, before heading toward her car parked a few blocks away. Though her demeanor remained composed, her mind replayed the judge's words. "The law is clear." The phrase lingered in her head, and while she respected the structure of justice, she couldn't ignore the rigidity she'd just encountered. Evelyn prided herself on understanding people, on weighing context alongside principles. It was a balance she had mastered in her years of leadership, yet it seemed foreign to the black and white world of Judge Harold Myers. As she reached her car, a student assistant from the university jogged toward her, waving. "Dr. Carter, I'm so sorry to bother you here, but I couldn't reach you on your office line." Evelyn smiled warmly. "No trouble, Lucas. What's on your mind?" He held out a folder, slightly out of breath. "The final details for the grant proposal you're reviewing. The deadline is this evening." "Thank you," Evelyn said, taking the folder. "I'll handle it as soon as I'm back on campus. Anything else?" Lucas hesitated, glancing back at the courthouse. Was this about the parking ticket? His question was hesitant, almost apologetic. "I mean, people were talking about it, and I just thought." Evelyn chuckled softly, putting him at ease. "Yes, it was. And yes, I was fined. But don't worry about it. It's done." Lucas nodded, though he still looked sheepish. "I just don't get it. You're the president of the university. Surely they'd understand the pressure you're under." Evelyn's smile didn't falter. "The rules apply to everyone, Lucas, including me. That's how it should be." She thanked him again, climbed into her car, and drove off, leaving her young assistant thoughtful. Evelyn had no desire to pull rank or make excuses. She had always believed that leadership meant modeling humility and accountability, even when it was inconvenient. Still, the encounter with Judge Myers gnawed at her. Not because of the fine, it was a trivial amount after all, but because of the man behind the bench. His unyielding approach, devoid of empathy, struck her as narrow. If only he had seen the bigger picture. Back in the courthouse, Judge Myers finished the day's docket with his usual efficiency, but his mind kept circling back to Evelyn Carter. He had handled dozens of cases that morning, most of them forgotten the moment the gavel struck. But she lingered in his thoughts, her composed demeanor standing out in stark contrast to the usual parade of defendants. Something about her had unsettled him. It wasn't just her calm acceptance of the fine, it was the sense that she had nothing to prove. She hadn't begged or tried to charm him. Instead, she had stood her ground with quiet dignity, as if she knew her worth didn't hinge on his judgment. Later that evening, Harold sat in his dimly lit study, sipping a glass of scotch. He opened his laptop, curious to learn more about the enigmatic woman who had unsettled his courtroom routine. A quick search of her name brought up dozens of results. Dr. Evelyn Carter, president of Grantwood University, one headline read. Another article detailed her groundbreaking initiatives to expand access to education for underprivileged students. Harold clicked through photos of Evelyn cutting ribbons, shaking hands with governors, and addressing packed auditoriums. She was far from the average parking violator who stood in his courtroom. Leaning back in his chair, Harold let out a slow breath. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered to himself. For the first time in years, he began to question the ironclad approach he had always relied on. The air buzzed with chatter and the soft clink of glasses as Judge Harold Myers adjusted his tie, standing awkwardly near the entrance of Grantwood University's grand ballroom. He wasn't one for social events, but his wife, Margaret, had insisted they attend the annual university fundraiser. "It's good for you to get out of that courtroom mindset," she had teased while buttoning his blazer. "Besides, you might actually enjoy yourself for once." Harold doubted it. He'd spent the better part of his career avoiding such events, finding them too pretentious for his taste. But tonight, he had relented, if only to avoid Margaret's persistent nudging. Now, standing among university donors and faculty, Harold scanned the room for familiar faces, his discomfort evident. A spotlight suddenly illuminated the stage, and the master of ceremonies stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. It is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening, a visionary leader, a tireless advocate for education, and the president of Grantwood University, Dr. Evelyn Carter." The audience broke into enthusiastic applause, and Harold froze mid-sip of his drink. He nearly choked. His eyes darted to the stage as Evelyn Carter, the very woman he had fined that morning, stepped into the spotlight with effortless grace. Evelyn wore a sleek navy dress, her expression calm and confident as she approached the podium. Harold's jaw tightened. What were the odds? He felt an odd mix of embarrassment and intrigue as he watched her address the crowd. "Good evening," Evelyn began, her voice steady and warm. "It's a privilege to stand before you tonight, surrounded by so many individuals who share a passion for education and the transformative power it holds. At Grantwood University, we believe in breaking down barriers, whether financial, social, or geographical, so that every student can have a fair shot at success. The audience nodded and murmured their approval. Harold couldn't help but notice how she commanded the room without raising her voice or demanding attention. Her presence was magnetic. She spoke of initiatives to expand scholarships, build community programs, and foster innovation among students. Every word carried purpose. Every sentence painted a vision of hope and determination. But then, Evelyn's tone shifted. Of course, leadership comes with its challenges, she said, a small smile curving her lips. We all make sacrifices, big and small. Sometimes that even means accepting consequences when circumstances don't go our way. Harold stiffened. Was that a subtle jab at him? He couldn't be sure, but the knowing glance she cast into the crowd made him feel exposed. Evelyn continued without missing a beat, moving on to anecdotes about her work with students and the triumphs she had witnessed over the years. The crowd was utterly captivated, giving her a standing ovation as she concluded. As the applause died down and the guests moved to mingle, Harold debated whether to approach her. Part of him wanted to sneak out unnoticed, but his curiosity won out. Clutching his glass of scotch, he made his way through the crowd toward Evelyn, who was chatting with a group of donors. When she spotted him, her expression shifted ever so slightly, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Judge Myers, she said, her voice polite but tinged with amusement. What a surprise! Dr. Carter, Harold replied, his tone stiff. You gave quite the speech. Thank you, she said smoothly. And here I thought you were more interested in rules than inspiration. The subtle jab made Harold wince, but there was no malice in her voice, only a quiet challenge. For the first time in years, Harold found himself on unfamiliar ground. He had always prided himself on being the one in control, but now he wasn't so sure. I suppose I owe you an apology, Harold said finally, his voice lower. I didn't realize who you were this morning. Evelyn's smile widened, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. No apology necessary, Judge. After all, the law is clear. Her words echoed his own from earlier that day, and Harold felt the weight of them. This was not a woman who could be easily dismissed, and as he stood there, he realized that their interaction was far from over. The atmosphere in the grand ballroom was charged with energy as the crowd dispersed into smaller groups. Judge Harold Myers lingered near the refreshment table, his mind replaying Evelyn Carter's words. She had delivered her speech with poise and passion, commanding the room like a natural leader. But what struck him the most was her sharp, subtle callback to their earlier encounter. Asterisk, after all, the law is clear. Asterisk. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of pointed remarks. The reminder stung, not because she had been disrespectful, she hadn't, but because she had been right. Harold's rigid application of the law left little room for understanding the nuances of people's lives. Evelyn Carter was clearly a woman of substance, and his curt dismissal of her earlier that day now felt embarrassingly short-sighted. Still, Harold wasn't one to retreat. With his wife Margaret's gentle push, "Go on, Harold. Talk to her. You can't just stand here brooding all night." He squared his shoulders and approached Evelyn, who was now speaking with a small group of faculty members. As he neared, the group dispersed, leaving Evelyn holding a flute of sparkling wine. She noticed him immediately, her expression composed but curious. "Judge Myers," she said with a polite nod. "It seems our paths keep crossing today." Harold offered a tight smile. "It appears so, Dr. Carter." Evelyn tilted her head slightly, a spark of amusement in her eyes. "To what do I owe the pleasure this time? Another ruling to deliver." Harold chuckled softly, though the humor didn't entirely reach his eyes. "No, nothing like that. I wanted to say your speech was impressive. Inspiring, even. I didn't fully appreciate the scope of your work until tonight." Evelyn's expression softened, though she remained cautious. "Thank you. That means a lot, coming from someone who clearly values structure and discipline as much as you do." He caught the subtext, but chose not to rise to the bait. "Discipline is important, yes, but tonight gave me a broader perspective on what leadership looks like. Your work at Grantwood University is remarkable. Evelyn smiled faintly. I appreciate that, but I suspect that's not the only reason you came over. Harold hesitated. He wasn't one to admit when he was wrong. It wasn't in his nature, but something about Evelyn's unflinching gaze demanded honesty. You're right, he said finally. This morning in court, I handled your case the same way I handle every case, by the letter of the law. But after hearing you tonight, I realized that perhaps I've been too rigid in my approach. I should have considered the bigger picture. Evelyn studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. I'm not asking for special treatment, Judge Myers. The rules exist for a reason, and I respect that. But context matters. People's lives are rarely black and white. Harold nodded slowly, her words resonating more deeply than he expected. You're right, he admitted, and I think I've lost sight of that over the years. Evelyn's demeanor softened further. Admitting that takes courage, Judge. Most people in positions of authority wouldn't. For the first time, Harold felt the tension between them ease. They weren't adversaries, but two people who cared deeply about their respective roles in shaping lives, even if their methods differed. As the night progressed, Harold and Evelyn found themselves in a deeper conversation about justice, education, and the complexities of leadership. Evelyn shared stories of students whose lives had been transformed by the university's programs, while Harold recounted moments in his career when he felt torn between the law and his conscience. By the end of the evening, Harold walked away with more than just respect for Evelyn Carter. He felt challenged to rethink the way he approached his role as a judge. And as Evelyn watched him leave, she couldn't help but wonder if their paths had crossed for a reason. The following morning, Judge Harold Myers sat in his chambers, staring at the stack of case files on his desk. Normally, he'd dive straight into preparing for the day's docket, skimming facts, and reviewing statutes to ensure swift rulings. But today, his thoughts were elsewhere, lingering on Evelyn Carter and the pointed conversation they'd shared at the fundraiser. For years, Harold had prided himself on his unflinching adherence to the law. The courtroom was his domain, a place where ambiguity held no sway. But Evelyn had unsettled that certainty. Asterisk context matters. Asterisk her words echoed in his mind, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth. His rigid approach left no room for nuance, no space to truly understand the people standing before him. He opened the next case file. A young man charged with vandalism after spray painting graffiti on a downtown building. The evidence was straightforward, the charge simple enough to process. But instead of jotting down the fine he would normally issue, Harold paused. The report mentioned the boy's circumstances. A high school senior with a history of academic struggles, living in a low-income neighborhood. He was trying to raise awareness for budget cuts to the school's art program. Harold tapped his pen against the desk. Normally, he would find the boy and dismiss him with a stern lecture. Today, however, he felt a tug of hesitation. What good would a fine do for someone who likely couldn't afford it? Would it address the deeper issue? Evelyn's face flashed in his mind, her composed demeanor, the way she had challenged him without antagonizing him. She would see the bigger picture here, he thought. The realization made him shift uncomfortably in his chair. Meanwhile, across town, Evelyn Carter sat in her office at Grantwood University, flipping through a stack of documents. But like Harold, her mind wandered back to their conversation. She had seen something unexpected in the judge, a willingness to reflect, to reconsider his entrenched views. It wasn't something she encountered often, especially from someone so steeped in the rigidity of the legal system. Evelyn had spent years advocating for students and faculty, navigating bureaucracy with patience and determination. But her interaction with Harold reminded her of a larger truth. Change often required engaging with people outside her usual sphere. Leaders like Judge Myers, despite their flaws, had the power to affect lives in profound ways. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Lucas, her student assistant. Asterisk, asterisk, Lucas. Asterisk, asterisk, Dr. Carter, thought you'd like to see this. Attached was a link to an article from the local news. Asterisk, Judge Harold Myers, announces new restorative justice program for youth offenders. Asterisk. Evelyn's eyes widened. She clicked the link, skimming the article. The program, designed to offer community service and mentorship opportunities instead of fines for young, nonviolent offenders, was a pilot initiative Harold had approved that very morning. The judge was quoted as saying, "Asterisk justice must be about more than punishment. It must consider the potential for growth and change." Asterisk. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, a smile tugging at her lips. The ripple effect of their conversation was already in motion. That afternoon, Harold presided over the vandalism case. The young man stood nervously at the defendant's table, his hands fidgeting as Harold reviewed the details. "Mr. Torres," Harold began, his tone measured, "you've admitted to vandalizing the building, and the evidence supports the charge. However, I've decided to handle your case differently." The boy looked up, confused. "Differently, Your Honor? Instead of issuing a fine, I'm assigning you to 60 hours of community service with the city's art restoration program. You'll also meet weekly with a mentor to discuss how you can use your talents constructively. If you complete these requirements, this charge will not go on your record." The courtroom murmured, surprised by the uncharacteristic ruling. Harold ignored the buzz and locked eyes with the boy. "This is an opportunity, Mr. Torres. Make the most of it." The young man stammered out a grateful response, and as the case concluded, Harold felt an unfamiliar sense of satisfaction. He couldn't help but wonder if Evelyn Carter would approve. Later that evening, Harold sat in his study and composed an email. Asterisk asterisk subject. Asterisk asterisk thank you. Asterisk asterisk dear Dr. Carter, our conversation the other evening left an impact on me. I thought you'd like to know that it's already begun to shape my work. Perhaps we could continue the discussion over coffee sometime asterisk asterisk. He hesitated for a moment, then clicked send. For the first time in years, Harold felt like he was learning to see the world in color instead of black and white. Evelyn Carter sat in her office, reading over the email Judge Harold Myers had sent. The formality of his words made her smile, but the underlying sentiment was clear. Harold was trying to change. It wasn't often that people in positions of authority reached out to acknowledge personal growth, much less attributed it to someone else. She appreciated the gesture and decided to take him up on his offer. A few days later, they met at a small cafe near the courthouse. The setting was informal, a stark contrast to their previous encounters. Harold arrived early, seated at a corner table with a cup of black coffee. He stood when Evelyn entered, greeting her with a slight, awkward smile. "Dr. Carter," he said, gesturing to the seat opposite him. "Judge Myers," she replied, shaking his hand before sitting down. "Please," he said, "call me Harold. I think we've moved past formalities." Evelyn smiled. "In that case, you can call me Evelyn." The ice broken, their conversation flowed more easily than either of them anticipated. Harold opened by recounting the case of the young graffiti artist and how he had opted for a restorative justice approach. "I have to admit," he said, swirling his coffee, "it felt different, uncomfortable even. But when I saw the relief on that boy's face and the gratitude in his mother's eyes, I realized it was the right call." Evelyn nodded. "Uncomfortable is where growth happens. It's where we challenge our instincts and expand our understanding." Harold leaned forward slightly. "That's something I've been reflecting on since I met you. For years, I've prided myself on being impartial, on following the letter of the law. But now, I wonder if I've been too focused on structure and not enough on people." Evelyn regarded him thoughtfully. "Structure has its place. But people aren't always predictable, Harold. They're messy, nuanced. Leadership, whether in a courtroom or a university, requires seeing the whole picture, even when it's inconvenient." He chuckled. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," she admitted, taking a sip of her tea. "But it's worth the effort. I've seen students who were written off by the system go on to achieve incredible things because someone took the time to see their potential. That's why I fight so hard for context, for second chances." Harold sat back, nodding slowly. "I think I've forgotten how to see potential. After years of focusing on efficiency and consistency, I lost sight of why I became a judge in the first place. Evelyn leaned forward. Then maybe it's time to reclaim that purpose. Their conversation stretched well past the initial coffee, delving into shared challenges and unexpected parallels in their work. Harold spoke about his early days as a public defender, driven by a desire to advocate for those without a voice. Evelyn shared her journey from being a first-generation college student to leading a university, driven by the belief that education could transform lives. As they exchanged ideas, Harold began to see Evelyn not just as an educator, but as a peer, a leader who understood the weight of responsibility and the power of change. You know, Harold said with a wry smile, I never thought I'd be taking advice from someone I find in court. Evelyn laughed, the tension between them fully dissolved, and I never thought I'd see a judge reconsider his approach. Life is full of surprises. By the time they parted ways, Harold felt a renewed sense of purpose. Evelyn, too, walked away with a deeper appreciation for the complexities of justice and the importance of engaging with different perspectives. For both of them, the meeting was more than a conversation. It was the beginning of an unlikely partnership. Each saw in the other the potential to bridge the gap between their worlds, to create change not just within their respective spheres, but across their community. And as Harold returned to his chambers and Evelyn to her campus, both carried the same thought. Perhaps this was the start of something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. In the weeks following their cafe meeting, Harold Myers and Evelyn Carter found themselves in regular contact. What began as a single email and an honest conversation over coffee evolved into something neither of them had expected, a collaborative effort to address systemic issues in their community. It started with Harold reaching out to Evelyn for advice on his pilot restorative justice program. I've already seen positive outcomes, he wrote in an email, but I want to make sure it's sustainable. Would you be willing to help me refine the program? Evelyn responded without hesitation. Absolutely. I believe we can achieve even more by involving Grantwood University. Their collaboration quickly gained momentum. Evelyn introduced Harold to several faculty members in the university's social work and criminal justice departments. Together, they proposed integrating student volunteers into the program, pairing young offenders with university mentors who could guide them toward constructive paths. The idea excited Harold. It not only strengthened his initiative, but also gave university students real-world experience in conflict resolution and community service. One afternoon, Harold visited Grantwood's campus to meet with the team Evelyn had assembled. Walking through the manicured courtyards and bustling student spaces, he felt out of place at first. The courtroom was his domain, structured and rigid. The university felt alive with energy and unpredictability. But Evelyn was there to greet him, her demeanor calm yet enthusiastic. "Welcome to Grantwood," she said, guiding him to a conference room filled with professors, administrators, and students eager to contribute to the project. The meeting was eye-opening for Harold. He listened as students shared insights about the challenges faced by their peers, particularly those from underprivileged backgrounds. Professors offered evidence-based strategies for reducing recidivism through mentorship and community engagement. Harold found himself taking notes, absorbing perspectives he had never considered before. As the meeting concluded, Evelyn turned to Harold with a satisfied smile. "What do you think?" "I think," Harold said, his voice steady, "that this is the most innovative approach I've seen in years. You've got some brilliant minds here, Evelyn. I'm lucky to have your support." Evelyn shook her head. "This isn't about luck, Harold. It's about collaboration. When people with different strengths and experiences come together, real change happens." News of their partnership began to spread. Local media picked up the story, highlighting how a university president and a judge were working together to reshape justice and education in their community. The positive attention emboldened them to think even bigger. Evelyn suggested hosting a community forum to discuss their initiative and invite public input. "If we want lasting change," she said, "we need the community to feel invested." Harold agreed, though the idea made him nervous. He wasn't accustomed to public forums, where emotions often ran high and criticism could be sharp. Evelyn reassured him. "Trust me," she said, People will respect your willingness to listen. That's half the battle. The forum was held in Grantwood's largest lecture hall, and the turnout exceeded expectations. Parents, educators, activists, and students filled the seats, eager to share their thoughts. Harold opened the event with a brief speech, his voice steady but genuine. For years, I believed justice was about fairness, about following the law without deviation. But I've come to realize that justice must also include compassion, understanding, and the chance for redemption. That's what we're trying to achieve here, and we can't do it without your voices. The room erupted in applause. Evelyn followed, explaining the program's goals and emphasizing the importance of collaboration between institutions and the community. Her natural charisma and ability to connect with the audience set the tone for a constructive discussion. By the end of the night, Harold and Evelyn had collected dozens of suggestions, stories, and offers of support. The event solidified their shared belief that they were on the right path. As they stood side by side after the crowd had dispersed, Harold turned to Evelyn. "I've spent my career issuing rulings, thinking that was enough. But this feels like real justice." Evelyn smiled, her voice warm. "Because it is, and this is just the beginning." For the first time in years, Harold felt hopeful, not just for his work, but for the community he had sworn to serve. Together, he and Evelyn were building bridges, one conversation, one case, and one life at a time. In the weeks following their cafe meeting, Harold Myers and Evelyn Carter found themselves in regular contact. What began as a single email and an honest conversation over coffee evolved into something neither of them had expected: a collaborative effort to address systemic issues in their community. It started with Harold reaching out to Evelyn for advice on his pilot restorative justice program. "I've already seen positive outcomes," he wrote in an email, "but I want to make sure it's sustainable. Would you be willing to help me refine the program?" Evelyn responded without hesitation. "Absolutely. I believe we can achieve even more by involving Grantwood University." Their collaboration quickly gained momentum. Evelyn introduced Harold to several faculty members in the university's social work and criminal justice departments. Together, they proposed integrating student volunteers into the program, pairing young offenders with university mentors who could guide them toward constructive paths. The idea excited Harold. It not only strengthened his initiative, but also gave university students real-world experience in conflict resolution and community service. One afternoon, Harold visited Grantwood's campus to meet with the team Evelyn had assembled. Walking through the manicured courtyards and bustling student spaces, he felt out of place at first. The courtroom was his domain, structured and rigid. The university felt alive with energy and unpredictability. But Evelyn was there to greet him, her demeanor calm yet enthusiastic. "Welcome to Grantwood," she said, guiding him to a conference room filled with professors, administrators, and students eager to contribute to the project. The meeting was eye-opening for Harold. He listened as students shared insights about the challenges faced by their peers, particularly those from underprivileged backgrounds. Professors offered evidence-based strategies for reducing recidivism through mentorship and community engagement. Harold found himself taking notes, absorbing perspectives he had never considered before. As the meeting concluded, Evelyn turned to Harold with a satisfied smile. "What do you think?" "I think," Harold said, his voice steady, "that this is the most innovative approach I've seen in years. You've got some brilliant minds here, Evelyn. I'm lucky to have your support." Evelyn shook her head. "This isn't about luck, Harold. It's about collaboration. When people with different strengths and experiences come together, real change happens." News of their partnership began to spread. Local media picked up the story, highlighting how a university president and a judge were working together to reshape justice and education in their community. The positive attention emboldened them to think even bigger. Evelyn suggested hosting a community forum to discuss their initiative and invite public input. "If we want lasting change," she said, "we need the community to feel invested." Harold agreed, though the idea made him nervous. He wasn't accustomed to public forums, where emotions often ran high and criticism could be sharp. Evelyn reassured him. Trust me, she said. People will respect your willingness to listen. That's half the battle. The forum was held in Grantwood's largest lecture hall, and the turnout exceeded expectations. Parents, educators, activists, and students filled the seats, eager to share their thoughts. Harold opened the event with a brief speech, his voice steady but genuine. For years, I believed justice was about fairness, about following the law without deviation. But I've come to realize that justice must also include compassion, understanding, and the chance for redemption. That's what we're trying to achieve here, and we can't do it without your voices. The room erupted in applause. Evelyn followed, explaining the program's goals and emphasizing the importance of collaboration between institutions and the community. Her natural charisma and ability to connect with the audience set the tone for a constructive discussion. By the end of the night, Harold and Evelyn had collected dozens of suggestions, stories, and offers of support. The event solidified their shared belief that they were on the right path. As they stood side by side after the crowd had dispersed, Harold turned to Evelyn. I've spent my career issuing rulings, thinking that was enough. But this feels like real justice. Evelyn smiled, her voice warm. Because it is, and this is just the beginning. For the first time in years, Harold felt hopeful, not just for his work, but for the community he had sworn to serve. Together, he and Evelyn were building bridges, one conversation, one case, and one life at a time.